What's up, heathens? How ya doing? I'm the Godless engineer, and I critically analyze apologists' claims to give you the best arguments and information so that you can stand up and use your voice. Today we're going to be taking a look at standing for truth, talking about ancestry and viruses.
Well, most viruses, what I'm saying, are actually beneficial, Mark. The question you're asking and the question most people ask are, don't most viruses cause disease? So I'm telling you, I'm telling anybody else who thinks that the answer is no. We have even more viruses in our body than bacteria. And we know that bacteria is good.
Wait, what? What in the fuck are you talking about? Yes, viruses are bad for you. And yes, we do have some bacteria inside of us that help us survive. I mean, you're just doing the exact same thing that other conspiracy theorists do. You're taking a nugget of truth and then illogically extrapolating from that truth to draw the conclusions that fit your narrative. If you want to find out the crazy shit that Standing for Truth is saying now, then please stay tuned. Before we get into today's video, I wanted to point out how creationism is basically a conspiracy theory. You see, with creationism, what you end up having to do is make these illogical and unsupported assumptions in order to fit the narrative that you want to tell. All creationists do this. Let's see what bullshit narrative Standing for Truth has for us today.
Okay, so we are here tonight to discuss the topic of ancestry. So LA stands for limited ancestry. We're going to discuss the origin of species. Do the species we see today descend from ancestors that were divinely created, as the Bible would tell us? Do all humans today descend from just two people, Adam and Eve? Or do we share ancestry with apes, monkeys, dogs, and banana plants?
Obviously, Standing is trying to make evolution look ridiculous while his position, creationism, look reasonable. The fact is that we do share ancestry with all animals at some point in history. What definitely didn't happen was God magically creating two people that then populated the entire world through incest not once, but twice. Simply put, the populations of 2 and 8 individuals do not provide enough genetic diversity to build that population to a worldwide number, let alone sustain any kind of population. So, between magic and science, yes, science is always going to win out.
Well, right off the bat, I can easily prove that limited ancestry exists. The genetic structure in humans today speaks to us of a literal Adam and Eve. The evidence for a literal Adam and Eve and limited ancestry is you and me, Mark, and even James, the awesome moderator of tonight's debate.
Oh, so when you said, I can prove this, what you actually meant was, I can provide some useless rhetoric, not really evidence or proof. I mean, Standing, are you ever going to provide us with any proof that supports your particular position? No, you never do. You see, creationists may think that they provide evidence, but in actuality, their evidence doesn't support their conclusion. Also, our genetic code points to us sharing a common ancestor with the other great apes. Chromosome 2 is a great example of that. If you didn't know, chromosome 2 in humans shows all the telltale signs of 2 separate chromosomes fusing together at some point in the past. We find that other great apes actually have 24 chromosome pairs while we only have 23. And we've been able to identify the 2 chromosome pairs in great apes that apparently fuse together in Homo sapiens. And here's why this is a kicker for creationists. They do not have any good explanation on their hypothesis of why this would have occurred. Why did God need to fuse 2 chromosomes together? Why couldn't he just make a whole new chromosome?
What Mark should be asking himself is this: what would we honestly expect if Adam and Eve were true? I think it should be obvious to anybody that we should be expecting evidence for one female ancestor of all people on the planet, as well as evidence for one male ancestor of all people on the planet. Genetic data confirms these expectations. For example, in our DNA, We have a piece of DNA that we only get from our fathers if we are a male. This is called our Y-chromosome. The Y-chromosome is passed on unbroken from father to son. From time to time, a mistake happens. And every time this happens, a new branch in the family tree is produced. If we simply look at all the branches in the world, they go back to a single person. And this single person is not a chimpanzee. Sorry, Mark. It's a man. This is a man who lived just a few thousand years ago. This is y-chromosome Adam. We can do the exact same thing with mitochondrial DNA, which takes us right back to one female ancestor, mitochondrial Eve.
So this is an example of somebody using confirmation bias in order to cherry pick information that agrees with their idea. This is also backwards from how any kind of critical thought would work. Standing for truth, like all creationists, only seek to confirm their hypothesis. If you do that, it ensures that you will only find information that agrees with your point. And generally, you end up having to cherry pick that information. In this case, if Standing for Truth would just lay out his hypothesis completely and compare it to the actual information, then he would see how it thoroughly disproves his whole hypothesis. First, let's lay out his hypothesis for him. His hypothesis is that two people, Adam and Eve, propagated the entire species of Homo sapiens before a flood wiped out most of the population, and then a population of 8 people then populated the entire world with Homo sapiens. Let's just put the whole minimum viable population of Homo sapiens on the back burner for a second. We don't really have time right now to discuss how two organisms don't really have enough genetic diversity in order to propagate or sustain a substantial population of individuals. Instead, we're going to focus on the information about the Y-chromosome Adam and the mitochondrial Eve. Y-chromosome Adam is the most recent common ancestor of all males, which isn't restricted by species, mind you. He is projected as living about 180,000 years ago to 300,000 years ago. Mitochondrial Eve originates about 150,000 years ago. And the most recent Y-chromosome common ancestor between Homo sapiens and Neanderthals is about 588,000 years ago. Now, in case you haven't noticed, this already doesn't bode well for the creationist hypothesis. And this is just purely based on the timelines. First of all, they're noticeably longer than 6,000 years. Second, this means that both of these individuals, Y-chromosome Adam and mitochondrial Eve, weren't necessarily Homo sapiens. You see, Homo sapiens started to emerge around 200,000 years ago. Third, the nature of describing these two individuals does not necessarily indicate that they either lived together or procreated. This is an essential aspect of Standing's hypothesis that is not substantiated by these two individuals. These three things definitely prove that Standing for Truth's hypothesis of creationism is false. These two individuals simply don't confirm his hypothesis. What he does is he cherry picks the information, then he uses that in order to confirm his hypothesis as true, which is not how a critical examination of any hypothesis should occur.
Classic textbook examples of universal ancestry include homology. You know, the shared structures seen in the biological world, shared four-limb structure, for example. But we know human engineers design in homologous patterns. Vehicles from Asia, North America, and Germany all build cars with headlights in the front, 4 tires, doors on the side, etc. I've got a minute here, so I'm just going to speed through this. But across the globe, we see shared designs and even shared blueprints. What about the so-called existence of transitional forms, Tiktaalik, Archaeopteryx, perhaps? Well, you know, that is those animals that seem to blend the features of two very different species. You could call these mosaics if you'd like. Well, think of a military vehicle that blends the features of both a land vehicle and a vehicle built for the ocean. For example, an amphibious assault vehicle. Or even think of a crossover vehicle that blends the features of both a van and an SUV. The point is, homology, transitional forms, nested hierarchical patterns in anatomy, physiology, and genetics all fail to reject the design hypothesis. both models can explain the data.
So here, Standing for Truth is trying to explain how homologous structures in different organisms is expected on both models. This is a straw man because the hypothesis of creationism would indicate that we should see specially created structures in nature. Instead, we find that all structures are previous structures with slight modifications. Having God reuse blueprints with slight modifications is just an ad hoc argument that Standing for Truth tacks on to his hypothesis. If he wants to prove how homologous structures are not evidence of common ancestry, then what he needs to do is provide us with a specially created structure in nature. We don't need ones that are obviously slightly modified versions of previous biological structures. That is predicted with a process like evolution. So in order to discern between evolution and his hypothesis of creationism, he would need a specially designed or created biological structure. He then goes on to compare this to cars and how they have the same basic components. This is a really bad analogy for two reasons. First, how slow and gradual the changes are in biological organisms. And two, the fact that vestigial structures still exist in organisms. I mean, you don't see vehicles now that still have a hand crank in order to start the engine. This is analogous to whales and dolphins having leg bones as remnants of their quadruped lineage. What if engineers designed cars so that they had that same look and feel of a horse-drawn buggy? That would be similar to a whiptail lizard, which is a completely female species going through the motions of sex with other individuals in their population, even though they reproduce by parthenogenesis, which doesn't require a male counterpart. Essentially, they just create clones of themselves. What if all cars were designed with oil lamps in addition to headlights? That's what wings on a cassowary or an ostrich are like. We don't see these structures in automobiles because they were actually designed, while organisms in nature are not designed. Now, for some reason, the conversation switches over to viruses, where they come from, and whether or not they're beneficial to people.
We do want to talk about viruses first and where this coronavirus may have come from and where viruses stand in the biblical creation model. Well, I definitely enjoy showing people that what they think they know about viruses for the most part is wrong, because it sounds like you assume that when you hear the word virus or think of viruses, you think of something bad. But little do most people know, actually, most viruses are actually beneficial. Like, do you know how many viruses roughly, Mark, that we have in our body and in our genetics?
What Standing is doing here is a common conspiracy theory trope. He's taking a nugget of truth and he's extrapolating it out into the narrative that he wants to tell. The narrative that he wants to tell is that viruses are not bad and they are, in fact, good for people. He even goes as far as to say that most viruses are beneficial to us. The truth is that humans have what's called a virome. We have viruses that act as a layer of protection as part of our immune system. The majority of these viruses are bacteriophages. These are viruses that would attack and kill bacteria that would otherwise make us sick. While the human virome is a fact, what Standing for Truth is telling us here is just not true. When we talk about viruses, especially right now, we are not talking about bacteriophages or the human virome. Standing is using an equivocation fallacy in order to convolute the conversation. While he says most viruses, bacteriophages do not comprise most viruses. He convolutes the idea of a virus with solely bacteriophages in order to suggest that viruses are only good for us. This is how he's constructing the narrative that he wants to tell out of existing truthful information.
Well, most viruses, what I'm saying, are actually beneficial, Mark. The question you're asking and the question most people ask are, don't most viruses cause disease? So I'm telling you, I'm telling anybody else who thinks that the answer is no. We have even more viruses in our body than bacteria. And we know that bacteria is good. For example, bacteria is good in our our gut. And I'm sure you've even heard, Mark, that we have more bacteria in and on our bodies than we do cells. And yet we have more viruses in our body than we do bacteria. But the question I think we should be asking is, what are all these viruses doing? Well, what they are doing, Mark, and you might be aware of this, is they are actually controlling the number of bacteria in our gut and the number of species of bacteria. Mark, this is all about regulation. The viruses are regulating the number of bacteria. Without bacteria, let's say in the ocean or in our bodies, there would be an imbalance not only in our bodies, but also in the ecosystem. So the point is, and to answer your question, yes, the fact is most viruses are highly beneficial and incredibly important. Now, don't get me wrong, not all viruses are good. Of course, the coronavirus is not good, but most of them are good. Now,
like I said before, bacteriophages do not constitute most viruses. What he's talking about here is the fact that bacteriophages number in astronomical numbers. 10 to the 31 is what it's estimated to be the population of bacteriophages on Earth. He's over-extrapolating from that number to suggest that most viruses are in fact bacteriophages. This is just not true. Astroviruses cause uncontrollable shitting. Adenoviruses cause pink eye, pneumonia, colds, and uncontrollably shitting yourself. Bocaviruses are associated with pneumonia and causing children to uncontrollably shit themselves. My point is that bacteriophages only consist of one particular type of virus that exists. Standing has to twist the real information in order to push the narrative that he wants to tell. Either he's lying or woefully misunderstanding whatever kind of fact sheet that he had scribbled down on a napkin that was next to his computer.
Where do we get the bad viruses? Well, the fact is, let's say if you look at, we can just look at the coronavirus, okay? So, viruses in general, they don't cause disease, but when they jump from a different species, like this coronavirus did, the new species does not have the ability to regulate the virus properly, and the virus tends to burn hot and fast. Now, fortunately, you might be aware of Ebola. Sometimes these viruses burn out, which is good. But the point is, viruses are beneficial. So they were created beneficial and highly important to our body, just like the endogenous retroviruses. They're highly functional DNA element. Important in our genetics, but over time, if they cross species or based on a mutation, they can go from good to bad, but the majority are good.
Now, novel viruses, and those would be new viruses, can be more detrimental to us because our immune system hasn't been exposed to them so that it can recognize them. Standing, again, is totally misunderstanding novel viruses as well as viruses in general. He ignores the numerous other viruses that are very detrimental to humans. And I mean more than just uncontrollably shitting yourself. I don't know what he means by regulating viruses properly. And the coronavirus is not burning hot and fast. Currently, without a vaccine, we're looking at employing social distancing as well as other preventative measures until 2021 or later. There's also a real possibility of another outbreak occurring this fall, and it could be even worse considering that it would be flu season as well. Of course, we also have all the dipshits that are out there protesting the stay-at-home orders, and they're just spreading the virus even more. Finally, viruses don't become bad just all of a sudden when they jump species. He acts like they start out good for the organism, and then when they jump species, they immediately become bad. Maybe the other species has a natural immunity to it, and they aren't affected like we are. It would be a novel virus for us, though, with no way of defending ourselves against it. That is what's detrimental and bad for humans. If the other originating organism didn't have a natural immunity or antibodies for that particular virus, then it would be detrimental to them.
To save this Canadian lynx, and we couldn't do it. I could not find another Canadian lynx with acceptable blood to transfuse into this Canadian lynx to save it, because it never got to the point where it had a genetic bottleneck. But the cheetah did. It got down to 10 to 20,000 individuals. We can
Right.
take any piece of
Mark,
skin.
is it okay if I cut you off? Because I like that you brought up the cheetahs.
Absolutely.
Do you know in Google how many cheetahs are left on this planet? Because I just looked it up the other day. Because I've always said about 10,000. I did a debate recently with Gutsick Gibbon, who had a hard time answering this question too. It's okay.
That's not how I remember the debate going, but also that's not what the recording shows.
Like due to inbreeding or...
Well, I'm saying if you've got if you have a single pair of multiple individuals, you should have every single organism that resulted from those kinds essentially looking like the cheetah right now. Much worse, actually, if you're going from a single breeding pair. I mean, we consider that functionally extinct in ecology today. I mean, it happened with the northern white rhino. That is an unrecoverable loss of genetic diversity. Because you're right, genetic diversity absolutely matters. The cheetahs are experiencing trouble, but I don't know that I would phrase it as that they're experiencing, a higher rate of mutation. The problem is that their lack, I mean, maybe I don't know enough about genetics to say, but as far as I know, I thought the primary problem was that they're all so identical that if there's a single disease that hits them, they have no defense because there's no kind of variety, which is really important.
Erika schooled you in that debate on the bottleneck with cheetahs. She also laid out why your hypothesis just doesn't make sense. You need a minimum viable population for any species to survive. Like Erika said, 2 or 8 individuals in a species is functionally extinct. This is because they don't have enough genetic diversity to sustain their population long term.
If you Google it, the cheetahs are down to about 7,000. And
That's
conservationists feel that, am I right?
Yeah, that's about right.
Right. And
last I heard, we were down to about 6,000 of them.
Right. And that's not good. That's not good. So conservationists feel the cheetah is already showing serious signs of inbreeding and genetic decline, because small bottleneck populations, as you know, have very significant problems. There's just not enough of these cheetahs. Now their sperm is degenerate. Mark, the genetic diversity has eroded due to the inbreeding. The species has been expressing many deleterious recessive mutations. But guess what? We're not going to see this population of 6,000 cheetahs suddenly explode into all parts of the world, seizing dominion over the planet. Yet that's what the evolutionist says happened 70,000 years ago with this small bottleneck population of 2 to 10,000 humans. They say they suddenly seized dominion over the world.
Standing says genetic decline and genetic degradation all the time, but he can't really tell us what he means by that other than bad mutations. What does it mean that a sperm is degenerate? Does that mean that cheetahs are not being born as much due to the low mobility of their sperm? Does that mean that the sperm are carrying bad mutations? What are you even fucking talking about, Standing? Currently, it's estimated that cheetahs need to maintain a minimum population size of 2,500 individuals in order to have enough genetic diversity to sustain their population. This population size will provide enough genetic diversity to weed out any of these bad mutations that Standing for Truth labels as genetic degradation. In fact, bad mutations have always existed and will continue to exist. It is just a natural consequence of how DNA and sexual reproduction works. There simply is no genetic degradation, whatever that might be. Finally, I would also like to point out how Standing for Truth, as well as other creationists, have to rely on supernatural special pleading arguments. He claims that there's an issue with the population of 6,000 cheetahs being able to provide enough genetic diversity in order to sustain that population. He claims that it's a problem for the 6,000 individual population of cheetahs to have enough genetic diversity in order to sustain their population. Yet, he also postulates that the genetically perfect Adam and Eve were able to inbreed their way into populating the entire world. Then Moses and family use sister, brother, cousin fucking in order to populate the world yet again. But yeah, 6,000 individuals in a population is a real big problem. I mean, he thinks that Noah's Ark really happened. So the cheetahs that we have now would have started out with just 2 fucking cheetahs. Why is a population of 2 fucking cheetahs better than a population of 6,000 cheetahs? I really don't understand your hypothesis, Standing. I really wish that you could provide some kind of explanation for any of these things that you've talked about. Oh, and I believe that Mark has a really great response to why cheetahs aren't taking dominion over the earth.
Why can't cheetahs do that? The only reason that cheetahs cannot take dominion over the earth is because there's man with guns. Man did not go up against man. Man was free to do whatever he wanted to. We are a species of animal that has taken over this planet. We have taken control of this planet, and no animal stands a chance against us. Are you saying to me that if the cheetah wanted to move to North America, it would just move here?
Whew, somebody call the burn unit. Thank you, heathens, for joining in today. I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, please let me know down in the comments below. What did you think about standing for truth's arguments in this particular part of the debate? I would really love to hear your opinions. While you're down there, make sure you smash that like button and subscribe if you like more debate analysis videos like this. Don't forget to stand up and use your voice. Bye, heathens.